I call the November 5th Assembly Finance Committee meeting to order. Ms. Wendell, will you call roll or note roll?
Thank you, Chair Wall. We have all Assembly members present in chambers besides Assembly Member Atkinson and Smith, who are available on Zoom.
Thank you. That brings us to approval of minutes. You have the September 3rd, 2025 minutes in your packet. Any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those are so moved. Brings us to agenda topics. We are going to start with the FY25 financial wrap-up. Ms. Flick.
Thank you, Chair Wall. I will share the PowerPoint here in just a second, but I did want to just take a moment. The cover memo for this, I don't usually do a preamble to the meeting, but it felt like it was appropriate for this meeting. We have a lot of things on the agenda tonight, and they are presented to you in pieces, but they all kind of tie together. So, we'll start with the FY25 wrap-up, which we're still in process of the audit, but there's enough that's solidified that we wanted to present to you tonight. We've got a whole memo and conversation about kind of the financial path forward given the election results that have just been certified. Something that we talked about earlier on in the calendar year was these items of foregone revenue. There's a whole memo on that plays together with some of these things. And then finally, a revisit of the dockage fee increase and how to utilize those funds as a potential option. So lots of things in the packet tonight. Recognition that you guys have had a heavy couple weeks of meetings, last week having 2 meetings, this week having 2 meetings. So we've worked with Christine Wall. There are some places we can eject if we need to, and if we can get to everything, that's also fantastic. So with that, let me see if I can successfully share my screen.
And for the committee, do feel free to ask questions throughout and wave at me if I don't see you.
Let's see. All right, well, we'll do it in, perfect. I think it did it and I wasn't patient enough. So let me hit that again and see if it comes across as the presentation. Yes, excellent. So we're going to talk about FY25. I did want to just take a moment to pause and have a moment of gratitude. You all know that finance has had experienced a lot of turnover. And actually, I think we were 3 years of getting our financial statements out really, really late. And we were not even in a position to give you a fiscal year update in November. Like, we pushed that to as close to the retreat as we possibly could. This year, I am exceedingly excited to say we've kept most of our core of accountants for almost a full year. We've had in the last month a turnover. But we are working on the final pieces of our year-end adjustments and our audit. We're pulling up transactions where last year we processed things in January and we're looking at them in October. So just super excited to see the growth of the team and just the year-over-year progress in improving our year-end close processes. So I fully anticipate that we'll be able to issue our financial statements on time, which is into the calendar year. The questions that the auditors have had for us are all completely reasonable and things we would expect them to ask. And so we're just in a really good place. So a fantastic team that I get to work with every day, and I'm grateful for them. And so I just wanted to take a moment and share that with you. But we're here to talk about our financials, so we will move on to that. This is, granted, a little bit of a busy screen, but when we talk about the general government We, let's see if I can hide some things on my screen so I can see it. This is our revenue picture. And so this is the general government. So it is your general fund elements and your sales tax elements combined together. This is how we generally talk about it when we put the budget together. You can see the types of revenue that are discussed here, our 25 budget, our 25 actuals. The difference between those, a positive number means that we brought in more revenue than anticipated. A negative number means less than the budget. When we built our FY26 budget, we had done an FY25 forecast. And so there are areas that we had communicated to you as the assembly that we thought we were going to be over or under budget. So that's what that next column, surplus deficit forecasted, means. So for charges for services, we thought we were going to be $350,000 over budget, have additional revenue than budgeted. It turns out we had $823,000 more revenue. So the newly realized is the last column, the $473,000. So you can see that in the case of our federal revenue, we actually brought in less revenue than we forecasted, or less revenue than was budgeted. And for state, overall, I won't read all of them. The big number on this page is the investment income, where we had $4.4 million budgeted. We had $15 million actual interest earnings. That's $10.7 million additional. We had guessed it would be about $4 million more. It was actually ended up being $6.7 million more than we had even forecasted. That has a lot to do with really, the feds had come in and forecasted, or the market had projected the feds were going to cut rates throughout the year. That didn't happen until September. So a lot of things that we had anticipated not being as good as planned, and they were great. Additional to that, we were able to have reimbursements come in from grants that helped the general pool earn more revenue than we had also forecasted. We had talked to you about sales tax being less than forecasted by about 1.2 million when we built the budget. It actually came in about $700,000 less than the budget, so almost $500,000 better than we had forecasted to you. So that's just kind of a rundown of all of the various types. You may be wondering why other is negative. A lot of that has to do with that's where we categorize bad debt, where we think we're going to write off revenue. So it is budgeted as a negative. We actually, amongst a lot of different kinds of other revenue, ended up having a positive position at the end of the year. We like to look at sales tax. We're going to talk about sales tax a lot, so we're calling this out. The green bar, 71 million, is our actual revenue. Our FY26 budget is $71.3 million in revenue. The purple bar at the end is the forecasted revenue given the exemptions that were passed with the ballot. A question that we often get asked was, well, how did the summer fare for us? Last Friday was the due date for sales tax that was collected July, August, and September. So I won't know the results of that for another few weeks. But the next slide breaks out all of the sales tax collections by quarter. So you can see that April, May, June revenue in sales tax was pretty much in line with what we'd seen the last couple years. So while we had kind of been hearing rumblings that it was expecting a soft summer, it turned, the reality was it came in about where it has been the last few years. On the expense side of the house, these are our different categories of expense and our budgeted amount, our actual amount, and the over or under. So in personnel services, we budgeted 63.5 million. There was 58.3 million actually expended, so we were $5.2 million under budget. Again, when we prepared our forecast for you, preparing for FY26, we had anticipated that we would end up being about $4.5 million under budget. So we realized about another $725,000 worth of savings from salaries, wages, benefits unspent. In the commodity and services, I broke these out into just kind of bigger groups so you can see where those landed. I will say about the community and youth grants, some of the assembly grants that you have awarded, you awarded a larger sum that were distributed over multiple years. So the total sum is in the budget, although just a portion was distributed, and so that shows as being an under budget. That basically rolls forward into 26, and we know that that's going to be, again, expended partially in 26 and partly in 27. Those are 3-year awards. And so that's the big driver in your under budget there in the youth and community grants. Overall, we were about $11 million under in our spending. We had planned and forecasted for about 5.2 of that. And so we realized an additional 5.8 million in savings from underspent. We will look at these a little bit in detail. So with respect to the personnel lapse or salary savings, however you want to think about it, so we had an amount budgeted for personnel and we didn't expend all of it. Here are the departments that had the larger portions of the underspending. So police and fire have typically led the way. Transit was a big number. Community development and finance kind of rounded that out. Also with streets. Comparatively, you can look at the 25 laps of some of the big departments compared to the 24 laps. And some departments are experiencing more, some departments are experiencing less. Finance, for example, we had almost $600,000 worth of laps in 24 and only about $300,000 in FY25. As I just said, like in our accounting team, we were able to retain most of our accountants. So, departments are experiencing some of that. The percentage is the percent of their department personnel services. And so just think of that as you can look at just the number or the slice of their personnel budget that was savings.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you for that. I'd asked you this earlier about the police. You want to explain that a little bit because we know that our police isn't fully staffed.
Yeah, so you can see police and fire are both kind of represented the same way in the numbers. You can see their 24 laps was 1.5 for police, 1.7 for fire, and in FY25 it was 1.2 and 1.4 million. So their dollar lapsing is less, but their percentage changed a bit, and that has to do with how big their personnel services budget was. So in FY25, 1.4 million was only 8% of the personnel budget in total for police, whereas in FY24, they had a larger dollar amount associated. Okay, so let me rephrase what I was just saying. It's been a while since I put these together. In FY25, I'm sorry, I'm comparing apples and oranges for you, and that is bad on my part. So I will follow up with apples and apples. The dollars are apples to apples. The percent in FY25 is the percent of the lapse of the department's personal services. And the 24 laps was actually the percentage of the whole, more like what we saw here. So sorry to put those apples and oranges together. Focus on the dollar values there. So it's dollars to dollars for sure.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So to talk about the apple for a second, just so I'm clear, I can focus on the dollar amount, and that's giving me apples to apples. 8% of their personnel budget, only their personnel budget, is what I'm looking at in 25.
Yes.
And 24 is the percent of their total budget. That's what you
is
just
the
said?
percent of all of the personnel lapse. So,
Oh, of all the personnel, got
yeah,
it,
so
yep,
similar to
Okay.
here where they
With
were
that.
about a quarter of the entire
Got it.
personnel savings. That was the same, roughly the same last year.
great.
So
Thank
sorry
you.
to do apples to oranges on you there.
No, that's helpful.
I'll ask a different question on this topic. You know, I remember when I first started at the Assembly, it was the middle of the pandemic. You know, we budgeted for a $1 million lapse. We were like, it's, you know, it was the pandemic. There's a lot of wild things happening with our, you know, across the country in terms of employment. Now we've seen several years in a row post-pandemic at, you know, a much larger number in terms of what our lapse is. Do we feel like this is just the new normal, or in terms of regular turnover in the department, or is this really being driven by, you know, our three big departments?
Thank you for that question. With respect to how we budget personnel and the anticipated lapse within personnel budget, we have over the last couple of years looked more closely at the department's historical trends and how they've been able to fill positions and adjusted the amount of expected savings in personnel accordingly to what they've experienced. So, for instance, in finance, we may have only budgeted 1% of our personnel as a lapse, and looking at where we had been over several years, we increased that to 5% last year. And so for, we're spending more time looking at that historical trend, but also in conversation with the departments to understand what's changing. You know, the CCFR implemented a new program this year and just, you know, brought 5 folks on as having passed their EMT. So they're doing things to kind of change the dynamic of their vacancies. And so it's looking historically, but also with that conversation of what they're trying to do differently to try to put that in anticipated lapse in the right ballpark so that we're not seeing unanticipated lapses year over year. Okay, we'll move on to non-personal lapses. This is broken out by the departments and divisions. This is the amount of their everything not personnel that they didn't spend out of their budget, and the percent of that department or division's budget that was lapsed. And we've also called out in a couple places where there's some one-time spending, because that's important to understand that, you know, like in the manager's office, they had $325,000 of unspent budget. 182,000 of that was a contingency line that we had budgeted, and we ended up not needing to use all of it as it related to the Muni Way facility and some adjustments that needed to have there. As we looked through this data, there wasn't any like one huge driver of, oh, this happened, or we planned for this and across the board, these things didn't come true. As we looked at where there were savings, it was little bits and pieces of everything everywhere. You know, just, you know, even looking at streets, there, look at the winter that we had last year compared to the snowpocalypse that we had the year before. So just, you know, less chemicals, less gravel, those things. So there wasn't anything that stood out as big red flags amongst these savings, just little things here and there that added up. We spend a lot of time talking about our general government departments and funds. It's also important to look at our non-general government expenses. So these are the departments and or divisions functions that are not general fund. So we have the FY25 budget, the actuals, and again, these are just focused on expenses. So if they're over budget or under budget. I want to point out that fleet is not, is a tiny piece of operational, but that is where we budget and purchase large equipment, vehicles. And so we see every year that we plan for things to come in, and, you know, and we just have a lot of stuff that don't make it in the 1 year timeframe. Some of that is large pieces of equipment that take longer to even build. But that's that large number, there that kind of stands out, as an anomaly.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question about wastewater coming in 14% under. There's obviously a lot of work that still needs to be done within wastewater. Is there a reason it wasn't reallocated to some other projects within the department?
That's a good question, Assembly Member Brooks. I don't have all of the details on wastewater. I know that part of their savings overall is personnel lapse. I know that they are a department that struggles to keep their positions filled. And then they would have associated supplies and services to go with that.
Thank you.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. Ms. Flick, I didn't realize you'd advance a page. If I'm just looking at the previous one, and I'm just curious, you know, I have my own curiosities with each department, and I'm not going to say, well, what about this one and what about that one? But is there generally, if I look at, is there a general theme across some of these departments where they're in the same sort of ballpark? And it's less obvious than like streets, you know, they're buying salt and gravel or whatever they're buying. That it's things like supplies, or they have like similar categories of what they lapsed on? Or is it really unique to each department? And if you don't know that off the top of your head, I can just in private ask about a couple.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. We should probably just talk offline about the ones that you're curious about. As we looked through these, we didn't see like an overall theme, like everybody had conferences travel or conferences canceled, or, you know, this big thing happened across the board. So we didn't see that a trend or a theme that kind of weaved through any of them. But I'd be
Okay.
happy to look at specifics where you're curious.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Mr. Steininger.
Similar question on trends and themes. Do you see kind of consistently departments or divisions year over year having kind of similar levels of lapse, or does it vary up and down quite a bit? Like, have you done kind of a backwards look over a couple of years?
I don't, Mr. Steininger, I don't know that we've really looked across a couple of years and across specific things. I know every year as we're preparing the budget, we look at what they're requesting, we look at what historically they've spent, where we've seen those trends, looking at those very granular details. We have those conversations with the departments as we're developing the budget.
I just will add, having built a couple of these budgets now, and then before as Engineering and Public Works Director, we are often aspirational in what we can get accomplished. So for example, if we have plans, I'll just use the this year budget example. We are going to redo our website. Well, we put money in this year's operating budget to redo our website, and we will start on that project, but we will not finish that project within this year. So that would be an example of, and you have that in lots of little line items, right? Projects that don't get finished and then, you know, have to be carried over to the next year, which means that we have to ask you for authority again to put those in the budget. So I think there are a lot of those pieces, and it really reflects our budget culture, which I'm proud of, where departments don't feel like they have to rush to hurry up to spend all the money so that they can justify getting that money in the next line item. And I know that's something we talked about before, but I just want to reiterate it because, you know, I suspect that that'll be an area to tighten, and that will have an impact on our budget culture.
Okay. We covered this slide, so we'll move to kind of wrapping up. This is the budget summary that you all have in the back of your budget book every year. So just, can't see my mouse move. So this starts with FY '24, but if you go down a couple lines, 25 is what I want to focus on. This outlines the budget summary as we had prepared it moving into the FY '26 budget. So this is what we thought was going to happen. And of particular notice, you'll notice the last three columns over on the right-hand side, the unrestricted fund balance and the restricted fund balance. So when we were getting ready to work with you about the FY '26 budget, we expected we would end FY '25 with 20 million in unrestricted fund balance and 16.5 in the restricted fund balance. So this is just a recap of what you saw when we were preparing the budget for FY '26. The next page is what actually happened. So these have been updated for the FY '25 actuals. And so everything that we've just talked about is incorporated here in slightly different words, just summarized a little bit differently. But you can see that our ending unrestricted fund balance is actually 31.4, and your restricted fund balance reserve is also still at the 16.5. So I'm just gonna pull from the page before that last line so you can just see them side by side. And I know it looks kind of funny on your printed page, but the difference there is an $11 million increase in your unrestricted fund balance. So that's our FY '25 ending, but you've already moved into FY '26 and you've already made decisions about the FY '26 budget, and there have been ordinances that have come through. And so the last page in this presentation shows the FY '26 adopted budget, the items that have come through as supplemental appropriations, and then things that we're already aware of that we're including in our forecast. And one of the things you can see in the yellow is we've worked into the budget our anticipated revenue loss based on our estimates for the exemptions on the sales tax that were recently passed. And so you'll see with that revenue reduction included, we anticipate without any other changes, the ending fund, your unrestricted fund balance to be at 15 million. Your restricted fund balance has changed to 17.3, and that's partly because you did make a contribution to the restricted reserve, but then we also pulled out the reserve for the Eagle Crest deficit. And then with the deappropriation of the Eagle Crest operating budget that recently went through after their staffing change, those all combined changed your restricted reserve from 16.5 to 17.4. And I can show that differently in a different way if we need to, but that's kind of the summary of how that number changed.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a question to help me think through that. I think I'm tracking with you, but our expectation at the time that we finished that budget, we had said, I'm on page 21 of the packet, was 16 in the restricted.
That's correct.
Well, I'm looking at this now, I'm looking at 25, and I see 20 in the restricted and 16.8 in the unrestricted, or if you can see that line. So does that, I'm trying to make that square with the 3 million contribution that we made to the restricted, because I would, we did that before we passed the budget. So I would expect to see that in what we expect before we got Eagle Crest involved in it. So I'm just trying to follow the math from that.
So the math on that, and this is in the published budget book, which will take me a minute to pull up, but if we need to, we can have Ms. Wendell share her screen. You made a contribution of 3.3 million for the budget process. As part of the budget process, when the decision was made to allow Eagle Crest to run a deficit, that's allowable if we restrict and additionally reserve funding. And the body had decided that they were going to restrict the restricted budget reserve. It's a lot of restrict in there. And so what we've done is we've pulled that out of the available balance. So you increased by 3.3, but you reserved 3,045,800, which you net those together and you roughly have $250,000 of an increase to what's in your restricted budget reserve that you could use in the future if you needed to. So that change, in addition, since you've approved the budget, Eagle Crest has done their position conversion, and with that, realized that the full budget wasn't required. And so a budget reduction came through, which meant that you didn't have to reserve as much of your restricted budget reserve. And so that freed up an additional 540,000. So that math gets you to the 17.3.
Perfect, thanks.
I'm gonna have you walk me a similar journey through the unrestricted fund balance. So many memories flooding back here. What I took you saying here is the 15 something that I can't read under my notes. 15 million under, at the very bottom of the page, is what now we would expect the unrestricted fund balance to be at the end of fiscal year 26, which takes what we thought it was going to be when we set the budget, plus the additional the surplus that we ended up with in FY25 that we didn't know about, minus our anticipated changes to sales tax, revenue, and other actions that we've taken.
That is exactly correct.
And then the 23 million that's in the unrestricted budget fund balance for the Assembly adopted budget, that's what we anticipated having at the end of FY26 when we passed our budget. That seems much higher than I remember, so that confused me.
That's correct. So that 23 had our assumption where we would in 25, plus the changes that were made when we built the 26 budget. And I think Ms. Wendell is going to share her screen and or talk with the numbers specifically in front of her.
Thank you. I'll try to provide a little clarity here. So the way that the budget summary document is formatted is that and perhaps we need to make an adjustment here, but the Assembly adopted budget amount of 23.7 million for the unrestricted fund balance does actually take into consideration the larger projected ending fund balance of FY25. So that includes the additional 11 million.
That
Why
makes
your memory is.
more sense to me. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. Keep rolling. Oh, Mayor Weldon.
You looked at me, so I'll have to ask a question. I'm assuming that the secure rules, schools funding will probably no longer exist. So is that a true statement?
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. We are anticipating that we will not receive the secure rural schools, which is why in our FY26 projection here, we've reduced our revenue by 523,000.
And a follow-up, so those are, what about community assistance, I assume it's the same thing. Tobacco tax revenue, you're estimating, this is you projecting for the end of the year as a reduction, or is that a policy call that you know is coming?
On the tobacco tax revenue, that's actually a reduction to the general fund because the tobacco tax fund was significantly under budget and was actually running a negative fund balance. So we reduced the amount of transfer from the tobacco tax fund to the general fund to keep it from going negative. If I could just provide clarity on the community assistance, we did actually receive some, it's just less than what we budgeted. And so that's the difference.
Okay, any other questions on the FY '25 update? And those folks online, I assume if they raise their hand, I'll be able to see them. I see your hand, Mr. Smith. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There was the point about investment earnings being greater than projected this year. And maybe it's a question for, will be pertinent for later, but I'll ask it now. Ms. Flick, there are years where we project and then we have lower investment returns as well. Would you confirm that? And if you remember, within the near future, maybe what size any of those, below projections were?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I believe it was FY '22 or FY '23. We were significantly, the market did terribly, and we had budgeted positive interest earnings, and we actually lost on the market side. So I don't know the scale of that. But it was in very recent history that did occur.
Thank you.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During those years where there were losses in the investment, was it the same methods of investments being conducted, the same firms and portfolios we're using currently? Sorry.
Thank you, Assemblymember Brooks. Yes, it is. We have not changed firms or investment pools since that time occurred.
All right, we will move on. I'll just remind folks this, there's a whole lot of data to unpack here. So, take your time, and I know staff are available to continue to help folks understand all that was just presented. All right, that brings us to financial paths forward with election 2025 results. Is this Ms. Flick or Manager Custer? Probably both.
Thank you, Chair Wall. I believe we are going to tag team this. So this is starting on page 24 of your packet. This is.
Oops, I'll just interrupt you real quick. I meant to say this. This is a long memo, and our intent is to take it kind of chunk by chunk here. So we've got some discussion questions and things built in along the way. So, okay, go ahead, Ms. Flick.
Thank you, Chair Wall. There is a lot of information in this memo. I tried to lay it out in a way that it would be easy to follow and kind of tie together concepts that move through. There are a lot of questions also in this memo, but we do not need to answer every question tonight. There are many decisions that need to be made over the course of our next few meetings together. And we wanted to make sure that you had a full picture of information in front of you, and that we tried to ask you questions that would help you start thinking about things and maybe start preparing you to make some decisions that you don't have to make tonight. There are a few things that we do need you to decide on tonight, and so we'll make sure that we either tackle those in process, or they're also at the end of the memo, so we make sure we don't lose sight of them. So we'll make sure that those get cared for. I don't need to belabor the point. There were several election propositions, 2 of them passed. Ballot Proposition 1 had to do with capping the mill rate at 9 mills. And this excludes debt service. And so previously it was 12, it will now be at 9. Our FY26 mill rate excluding debt service is 9.16. The FY26 impact of this ballot proposition passing is nothing. Your FY26 budget was built with the mill rate, which you passed as part of the FY26 budget preparation. I believe you passed it on June 9th. Those mill rates were applied to the assessed values as of January 1st of 2025. Property tax bills went out roughly July 1st. Property taxes were due September 30th. The election happened after that. So at this point, there's no action in FY26 and no impact from that particular ballot measure on FY26. However, moving into FY27, we will need to reduce our mill rate by that 0.16 mils. Assuming a relatively flat market in the real estate world, we would expect that to be about $1 million worth of revenue loss to the various general fund components that make that up. So that is something that we will have to address with our FY27 budget. Proposition 2 had 2 components. One was an exemption of sales tax on basically SNAP eligible food, or food as defined by the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008. There's that component, and then there's also a component having to do with utilities at the primary residence. Those take effect here this month. The estimated annualized impact of both of those is roughly $11 million. We're partway through FY26, so roughly 7 of the 12 months will be impacted. And so we calculate that to be about 6.4 million of a revenue decrease for FY26. And again, annualized for FY27, it's total of 11 million. Depending on how we address FY26, that could just be an incremental adjustment to the full year or the full 11 million. So what's really important to take away from the sales tax discussion is that our sales tax is made up of 3 main components. 1% is permanent, and that goes to our operations. 1% is temporary, and that goes to specific projects. And so on page 30 of your packet, attachment A is a breakout of the sales tax. So the list A there on your right are the 1% temporary projects that will, now that 1% has a less value going forward for the remainder of that particular time period for which the 1% is in effect through September of 2028. And then the last component is a 3% temporary tax that we break up into 3 pieces. And what you see there on attachment A is the 3 pieces broken out as they appeared on the ballot. So what I've called list B is 1% of the 3% temporary tax that goes to projects related to roads, drainage, retaining walls, sidewalks. We've also been doing utilities with part there. List C are the operational components that are funded through the sales tax as called out on the ballot. And list D is the last 1% of that 3%, where it goes to some capital projects, called out to go to the budget reserve, or other operations. A lot of that 1% ends up being operating in nature. So when we look at the 1% pieces of our 5% sales tax, annualized again, 11 million, 4.4 million would be a one-time reduction to projects, and 6.6 million would be recurring that we would need to reduce out of our operating budget. Again, that's kind of the annualized picture. So that's the breakdown of the impact of sales tax. All right.
I'll just pause and note that while the 1% is one time, obviously there's a reduction in overall sales tax revenue, which means all things being equal, voters reauthorizing our 3% and 1%, we will be collecting less revenue for capital projects. So moving forward, we will be looking at building new CIPs with less capital projects unless directed otherwise by the Assembly.
Mr. Smith, then Mr. Steininger, then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to, as we're just, anyway, I wanted, just as we're looking at reductions, one thing, of course, I don't want to see us do is, cut CIPs too hard and that we are essentially creating a large deferred maintenance hole. And this is something that can maybe come back later or whatever, but do we track and compare to, commonly accepted metrics or something like how we're doing in terms of spending on our infrastructure, on city-owned infrastructure, like, I don't know, I'm sure there's a percentage out there that like you should be spending. Do we track that or do we know how we're doing compared to, commonly accepted metrics on infrastructure investment?
So I have done that analysis in the past for our facilities. And there are kind of industry standards on how much you should be spending per year as a percent of the building value. And certainly worth running those numbers again and looking at that in the context of all of the capital maintenance projects that we do, deferred maintenance projects such as streets and utilities. But at the time when I ran that set of numbers, we were at the very low end of what would be the industry standard for facilities. And that includes like some major facility projects. And then I would say that we are probably behind in our utility and street investment, just given the number of water leaks we have had over the last few years. It has seemed a lot. That is, when I say behind, you have to remember we are for Alaska a pretty well-established town. So we are experiencing, failure of infrastructure that was put in when we had a big housing boom in the 80s. So part of this is the nature of how long we've been around. But I would say there's definitely the need for increased investment in just the kind of regular replacing water lines and sewer mains and boilers and the kind of not as fun capital projects.
Mr. Steininger,
I'm good, it got covered. Thank you, though.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. So those $2.2 million that are taken from each 1%, just to get an idea of like how severe they are to each list, that's 2.2 million out of how much? Or would you have that number offhand, or maybe I can circle back?
So, Mr. Kelly, I'm not entirely sure what your question is, but typically, like our 1% temporary sales tax would bring in about $14-ish million. So a 2.2, I could do the math right, hang on.
I think I could do the math. So it's
Okay.
2.2 out of 14, basically.
2.2 out of roughly 14, so 15,
Okay.
16%.
All right, thank you.
I've got a question on This one, I think, I heard you, Ms. Kester, about kind of we often, maybe this is terminology, we often talk about expenses being one-time or ongoing operations versus a project that we're gonna, do this year and don't have to continually fund. Here, we're talking about revenue as one-time or ongoing. Sales tax is an ongoing revenue. You're just making a distinction between, I think you're making a distinction between projects that we said we would do that qualify as projects, like CIPs. We have to do CIPs in the future, but we were specifically funding a particular project in this year. Am I capturing that correctly?
Thank you, Chair Wall. Yes, I think a great example is, we will always need to do capital projects. There will always be a need to do infrastructure projects. You only need to pave a certain part of the road once every however year. So from a project perspective, paving road XYZ is a one-time event, but you will always need to be addressing different pieces of road. So 1% of our 3% temporary tax goes to road, street type projects. So it is a continual need, but the projects themselves are one-time in nature. And that's as opposed to if we needed to make an operating cut where it's like, we open the doors every day to here and now we need to not open the doors, or we need to have fewer hours. That would be a recurring or an operating reduction. That's it.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't, anyway, I think your question was similar to mine, I guess, but just to make sure I understand, I'm sorry if I missed it if you said it earlier, Ms. Flick. Obviously the voters approve some of these taxes, 4%, 4%, I believe. There isn't a legal or any other type of requirement that we would make reductions, based on these kind of buckets of different 1% of taxes, right? Just because we ask the voters to say, oh, we want a 3% and it covers list B, C, and D, and those go to those different things. We don't have to apportion it in that way. Like we could make more cuts to recurring things versus CIPs or something, or in the other direction.
Thank you, Assemblymember Smith. I'm not the lawyer in the room, so perhaps this is truly a legal question. But I do believe that we have an obligation to follow the intent of the ballot measure as it was presented to the voters. So the voters passed a 1% temporary tax to do these projects. We need to do the best we can to adhere to that. The exemptions that were passed means that we are going to bring in less revenue to do those projects. And so the extent to which we can accomplish those projects may change in our plan for the future compared to what we may have planned a year ago.
Do you have a follow-up, Mr. Smith?
I think maybe I'll just chat with the attorney just to, anyway, just trying to figure out how closely or not we need to, adhere, I'll say, to these different buckets or something. But no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I should probably follow Mr. Smith's lead, but just talking through that in a follow-up, when we make specific projects and take it to the voters, it is always an estimate. Is that correct? Because there could be a huge inflation hike and we don't anticipate that, but that would, depending on the tax, bring in more tax, and then we would have that percent would be a higher number, correct? Just the same way that now with an exemption, it's going to be a lower number. Does that seem right?
I pulled up the ballot language from the last 1%, for example. And in that, the ballot language did not have dollar amounts associated with projects. It just listed the projects, and it clearly listed that it is the intent. So it depends, again, goes back to that intent language. And in having conversations with the city attorney on this, she said probably, changing the dollar amounts within that bucket or postponing some of the projects would be very defensible. Just cutting some of those projects would be more difficult. So I am like poking at Emily quite a bit on this topic because I definitely see some things on this list that might not be as high a priorities given our current fiscal situation.
Thank you.
Mr. Steininger.
And I guess kind of sort of follow up to this line of questioning, when I look at this list, and particularly under the 1% in list A, some of these projects are significantly, if fully complete, would be significantly more expensive than the total amount we had anticipated collecting from that 1% over its lifetime. I mean, some of them are pretty spendy projects. So like the idea of being bound to complete every one of those projects seems like because we never could have done it because there wouldn't have been enough revenue collection anyway. So we're just bound to doing some work on each of those projects, I guess. Like we haven't appropriated enough to complete the relocation of the City Museum, for example, or the, construction of the Lemon Creek multimodal pass. So like, I guess I'm trying to understand, what the actual commitment to the voters is if we couldn't have even completed the projects in the first place. Does that make sense, or am I just kind of rambling?
I understand your question, and I do think that Emily would be best suited to answer that question. I will explain kind of how we use these funds when there are not enough money, of course, to do the project. And Lemon Creek Multimodal Path is a great example. We've used that funding to initiate design and to match other grant opportunities. So get design, to a level where we then can apply for grants. And we've received, I think, 2 different grants for Lemon Creek Multimodal Path. So a lot of these funding, streams are set up to be able to do the work to advance a project to understand. I mean, there's projects on this list that we have like relocation of City Museum, we have very little information about. I believe there's a $500,000 appropriation. Obviously, that's a much larger project. And so like practically speaking, how we would use that would be to develop a plan and a budget and whatever level of design to be able to, take that to the assembly. You can advance funds, advance projects through design, but you remember you cannot construct the project unless you have full funding for the project. So that's kind of where you get that commitment. Doesn't answer your question, but I just thought it might help you understand how we spend the less than enough money to do the project funds.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for the ones that do have specific amounts attached to them, the ones that come to mind for me are the wastewater and the police communications. When that was brought to a vote, I remember them having specific amounts. So how is kind of the process as far as changing the amounts?
And just suited to answer this question, but we could not spend the full amount, but that would be an example where like we can't spend bond money for public safety communications infrastructure on anything but public safety communications infrastructure. So a general obligation bond is different, and I would say far more binding than the intent language in the 1%.
Absolutely. Very different ballot questions. So the a question going to the voters to say we'd like to have a 1% temporary sales tax to do these projects is very different from the general bond question that went to the voters about the public safety infrastructure, which was, we're looking for permission to go get $12.5 million, if I remember correctly, in general obligation bonds to construct this project. And sometimes, there was also the $10 million wastewater infrastructure bond that had a couple of projects listed, but we can't take any of those bond proceeds from that $10 million and use it to go build a street or to go build a building. So the bond language is very much more binding in particular. The sales tax language, we do, we say our intent is to do these types of things with this sales tax fund. The sales tax amount that we collect is going to be variable, as Ms. Hughes-Gandy's pointed out. We collected much less during COVID, collected a lot more on the rebound when, tourism picked back up. And so just very different ballot questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Hall?
And this is going back to the, the projects on list A. So if you bring something up through the design phase, but the federal grant has gone away for it, and so basically kind of killing the possibility of that project, or, is that design okay for, 10 years down the road when we may pick it back up and be able to complete the project, or how does that work with the federal funding that's not likely to come through?
So if you're specifically referring to Lemon Creek Multimodal Path, we have successfully procured grants for that. Now, we still don't have enough funding to construct that project. We also are hopeful to, in the future, use some of the funds that we have to leverage match for future federal grants. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so the project doesn't go away.
Madam Mayor?
I don't know if this will help or not to remind everybody about the sales tax. So if you remember, when a sales tax passes, we come up with a 5-year schedule, and as an assembly, we change that schedule all the time. So there is flexibility in it. And as Director Kester says, we also have years that the sales tax comes in under, so then we don't allocate as much. So there is some flexibility, but we do try to do the intent of the voter as much as possible.
Mr. Brooks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to piggyback on Assemblymember Hall's question. For the plans like the multimodal path being completed and then using those plans to secure the grants, how long is that plan good for to keep applying for grants? So does the plan have to be within the last 5 years, or what are the requirements for applying for more grants with projects like that?
It's 100% dependent on the specific grant program that you would be applying to. Generally speaking, work that we put into developing a project doesn't go stale or die or change unless there are extenuating circumstances that change the nature of it. I mean, if isostatic rebound totally changes the geotech in that area, then maybe our design for a path that is that is a raised path doesn't have to be a raised path anymore. But of course, those are things that are hard to predict. So I guess, the work that we do on projects is always good work, and is also sometimes becomes outdated, like any work, but there's no set time that all federal agencies or all granting agencies have have put on that, unlike when you apply for NEPA or some of those processes that you're more familiar with, where you're like, you have to do it within a specific timeframe.
Thank you.
I think we can keep going.
All right, page 2 of the memo. So we already spent time talking about the FY25 update, and again, just, all of our topics today weave together. I do want to take a moment and just talk about our revenue estimates. Because as we began work in the spring talking about sales tax and exemptions and different ways that might be constructed, we as staff put together a model. It was based on information that we had. Certainly, we have not collected complete data in the past to answer exactly how much revenue is going to change because of the 2 exemptions being food and utilities, what exactly that number is going to be going forward. So we put together an estimate based on information that we had, assumptions that we made. I know other members in the community put together models. Some of those we shared and discussed. They were relatively close. They weren't exactly the same. They were built on slightly different data, slightly different assumptions. I think the one thing that we all agreed on is the impact to the revenue is not 0, but what it actually is somewhat unknown. The first full quarter of sales tax collection with these new exemptions is going to be January, February, March. Those sales tax returns and remittances are due April 30th. So it will be mid-May before we know what that first quarter even looks like. By that time, if you all follow the same trajectory as you usually do, which is good, you will be done with the budget discussions, and all of those budget legislation pieces will be waiting for the full assembly to act on in the beginning of June before we even know what the first full quarter looks like. So we just need to, again, acknowledge that all of these estimates are estimates. It is going to take a while for us to see the full impact of these exemptions and how they play out before we know what the true numbers are. There are a lot of ways that we can go about reducing the budget. We know that there is a revenue impact. We know that we're going to have to reduce our FY27 budget. We can definitely take many approaches. One approach that's often used is just across the board cuts. Everybody cuts 5%. Everybody cuts 10%. I would argue that that's, in some ways, people will say that's completely fair. Everybody deals with the same percentage of pain. But certainly how departments are constructed and the services they give don't necessarily always lend themselves to just a straight across the board cut. So if you're, I think I used HR as an example in the memo, who really has people and a couple of paper clips, a 5% cut to them is going to be very different from like a streets department that has people and equipment and lots of supplies and other things. And so being able to manage that kind of a cut would be different. Oftentimes, organizations will say, we're just going to do hiring freezes, which is okay as a short term, kind of get through a period where you're making decisions. But a hiring freeze is not a permanent reduction to expenditures. The only way that that turns into a reduction of expenditures is by a reduction of positions, which in our case usually means a reduction of services. So a hiring freeze could be an option. A lot of people or different organizations might say, oh, we're just going to stop doing whatever. No more training. We're not paying for certifications. We're not going to offer, we're not going to pay for this line of business. That's one way to do it. Service reductions are another way to look at either bringing down a level of service, eliminating services. There's a lot of ways to get to what those might be. Another way to fill a budget gap is to increase revenue. So there's only so many ways that revenue can be increased with our particular situation, but looking at revenues might be a way to also reduce the gap. And then finally, there's a lot of just tools in the toolkit for the manager and for finance and budget staff as we work through budget preparation. And that we already talked about like personnel lapses and right sizing how much we think we're going to fill positions or how much turnover we think we're going to experience. And there's a lot of tools that we do that are just kind of invisible behind the scenes that we can use to help mitigate budget. So there's a lot of options available to us. This is certainly not a comprehensive list, but those are kind of the big highlights of how particularly governmental organizations look to reduce budgets.
If I could add my color, Angie said that it's her job to present and my job to add colorful commentary. So I just want to remind people that on budget assumptions, that is certainly one way to make, changing those is certainly one way to make our budget and our actuals match more accurately, but it is not reducing what we spend or increasing what we earn. So it's the tool that just makes us more accurate. It doesn't actually change our financial position.
Thank you. So as staff, we've talked about like how we might recommend that we move forward, and our recommendation for your consideration is a combination of looking at service reductions. There are some places where we may be able to adjust revenue, and then just internally we'll use those tools associated with budget assumptions to tighten things up. So that would be our recommendation going forward. That decision doesn't necessarily have to be made tonight, but Chair Wall, this might be a great place to pause and see if there are any questions.
Questions? I've got one. To me, it's really helpful to have this terminology here around options so that, I think these will be ongoing conversations and we can use shared vocabulary. Some things that have been suggested, that people have been talking about, I'm curious what category you'd put them in. Shifting to more debt has been something that's been discussed as we were preparing for these ballot initiatives, that we may, things that typically would have been covered by revenue, can be put to voters for debt financing. And the other things are kind of redirecting revenues that used to go to some things and maybe now should go somewhere else. So we're going to talk about one of those tonight with dockage fees, which used to go somewhere, and we're like, maybe we should go somewhere else. Hotel bed tax also comes to mind. Should I be thinking about those as kind of in the revenue increase bucket? In terms of what you're recommending, do those things kind of fit neatly in any category?
Thank you, Chair Wall. I'd like to tackle those very distinctly. So let's deal with the second thought process that you brought up first, which is reallocating revenue or redirecting revenue. I think that does fall in the revenue conversation, not necessarily increasing revenue, but I do think it could be a combination of a service reduction and a revenue increase, right? So if we used to spend revenue here and we don't want to do that anymore, that might be a service reduction, and then taking that revenue and allocating it somewhere else. As far as like putting in category, I think you could certainly put that in kind of a revenue increase category. A revenue reallocation would fit in there. The first item that you mentioned about using debt perhaps as an option, I think these budget reduction options that are in the memo are really geared towards operations. So operational reductions to the budget. When we talk about utilizing debt, we should not be talking about debt to run our operations, right? So debt is really geared around projects. And so it might be that we want to use debt as a mechanism to fund various infrastructure projects or capital projects, more so in the future than whereas we may have just taken fund balance and allocated. But that is definitely more of a one-time usage of funds. And so we would want to talk about the utilization of debt more in a capital project kind of discussion. Although, you know, when it comes time to revisit some of these temporary sales tax, maybe the structure that's presented looks different going to the voters the next time around than what we have today. And so that might be, you know, part of the conversation. But certainly when we talk about debt, we should really focus that on funding of projects, certainly not funding of operation. And that was the intent of these reductions, was more operationally speaking.
Makes sense. Thanks. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess it's not a question, it's more of a comment. So if we're not ready to get there quite yet, then that's fine. I did just have a comment about the budget assumptions, especially in light of the response to my question earlier on investment returns and how those can swing in both directions. So, but I'll hold it for now.
Yeah, let's hold for now. I think we're going to
Okay.
get I bet lots of folks are anxious here to get to a little bit more discussion. You want to talk us through more about, I guess, we'll start with FY26, and I think some of this stuff will come up.
Okay. Certainly. So, you know, given the fact that we did have, particularly, interest earnings that we hadn't counted on, we have the opportunity to, take some time to make thoughtful decisions about reductions that we need to make. So, certainly we could make some decisions today to make service reductions today. But, certainly any service reductions that we make have an impact. And I would suspect that the body wants to take some time to thoughtfully consider those, engage the public in those. And I think that we have an opportunity to utilize some of that extra revenue that we got in '25 to give us the time to make thoughtful decisions on where we want to make reductions. And so when we think about FY26, our recommendation would be to have the Assembly take the time to make those thoughtful decisions rather than jumping to cut things right away, and allow yourselves the time to engage in a public process that's meaningful to you to get the information that you need to make those decisions. There are a couple things that we'd like to bring out about FY26. So when we distributed general fund-based Assembly grants that were approved in the FY26 budget, we distributed a portion of those grants, and we let those grantees know that we would get back to them mid-November to after the election came through and the Assembly had a chance to discuss kind of what we needed to do going forward in response to the election. We would let them know if the full FY26 amount would be remitted out to them, or if there would need to be a reduction in the FY26 grants. And so we do need to provide some guidance or we need your guidance so we can provide communication to those Assembly grantees about the FY26 distribution of grants. Handed out to you was a sheet of paper that has the list of the grantees, the amount that was budgeted, what has actually been dispersed to them, and what's remaining to be dispersed. not all of those fall in this category. Some of those grantees are reimbursement grantees. Some of those grantees have marine passenger fee funds, so those are kind of outside the scope of the conversation. But that's what to do next on assembly grants is something that we will be looking for your guidance on tonight. There may be other things that you wish to give staff guidance on. If there are areas where you want to pause on programs, for instance, we know the affordable housing program, grants and loans is in process, but no official awards have been made yet. That could be a potential area where you may want to just pause on that and decide if you really want to give those grants or loans out this year or not. We've already spent a lot of time talking about projects, and certainly not doing projects doesn't solve a recurring revenue gap. But there may be other projects that you want to have staff pause on, whether that be one-time expenditures or actual projects. We mentioned a couple in the memo. The gondola project is one that we know is going to require more funding. Under the assembly direction, we're moving forward on that. So that might be one where you want to have staff take pause. We know that there's additional funds that we're going to need to allocate to the renovation of the Burns building to move staff in there. We know that that's coming up. There are other projects, some of them we've mentioned tonight already in discussion about projects. The Waterfront City Museum, the North State Office parking garage. There are just some out there that we know might be of interest for the assembly to pause. And so whether we want to take action on those tonight, some questions that we have for you is whether or not you want staff, or I guess staff recommends that we don't make any broad service reductions or formal operating budget reductions right now for 26. The assembly guidance on that, or if you have guidance on where you want reductions to happen, we would need to hear that from you. We do have a question about having you all direct to us to either distribute or not distribute the rest of the remaining assembly grant funds. And then if there's any direction that you want to give staff on FY26 one-time expenses or projects that might be out there. And if there's commentary that you want to provide to that, this would be great. Or not.
Thank you, Director Flick. I think you did a great job summarizing the guidance that we're looking for. We appreciate that there's a lot of public process and assembly debate that needs to happen around all the service reductions and around cuts, but we also want to make sure that that those decisions rest in your hands. So if you see things that need to be addressed sooner because of the direct impacts in FY26, we're ready to have those conversations. So this is an opportunity to give us that direction.
Any last questions on staff recommendations on FY26 or the general state before we have a conversation, Mayor Weldon?
Thank you. So just the FY26 recommendation. So if we used the 6.4 million, that leaves us 8.5 million roughly in our unrestricted fund balance. Is that correct?
Mayor Weldon, the FY26 expected fund balance, given the actions that the Assembly have taken so far. Give me a moment while I find the page in the packet. Page 23 of the packet, the last of the FY25 update. You currently have 15 million sitting in your unrestricted fund balance. That includes an anticipated revenue reduction of, is it 6.7 million? 6.4 million that we anticipate of lost revenue from sales tax. So you would still have 15 million left in your unrestricted fund balance.
Projected at the end of the fiscal year 26.
That is correct.
I will
Manager
just-
Kester.
I will just highlight that does not include IFF and PSCA negotiated wage increases. So just always keep that in the back of your head as another liability.
But it does I saw some estimates on that somewhere in here. Never mind. Misuse candies, the Mr. Steininger.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to address a number in the paragraph. I'm looking at page 26 on the gondola project. Was in another meeting about that project today and got to talk to, well, our friends were in the room on that project. Oh, I didn't see him. There he is. You moved, Mr. Simmons. The best guess that we have there now, those numbers, I think, are different than the updated numbers I heard today. So Mr. Barr was in that meeting, and I just want to verify that so the entire assembly has that same information when we're looking and thinking about all of this. In the memo I'm looking at here, it says our best guess is that if we pulled out now, we would have a sunk cost of 10.8 million and have to write a check to Gold Belt for 11.7 million. But my understanding is that based on the unspent funds, if we were to pull out today, the check that we would be writing to Gold Belt would be more like 7 million. Is that correct?
Thank you, Ms. Huskindis. We believe the new money that the assembly would have to come up, we would still have to write a check for 11.7 million, but the new money that we would need to come up with based on the amount that is currently in the fund unspent would be about 6 million.
6 million, okay. So 6 million in additional funds with what we have today. Thank you.
Mayor Weldon. Oh, I missed Mr. Steininger, sorry.
And I don't know if I'm going out of order of the kind of way you wanted to organize questions. My question is related to the assembly grants that have been distributed. Are you okay with that?
Any questions related to what that'll help inform your decision about FY26, our open season right now?
All right, thank you. So with all the funds we withheld on those grants, what kind of feedback have we received from the grantees? Is withholding those funds causing problems with payroll, causing problems with getting projects moved, causing other financing problems for any of these grantees? Are there like specific pain points that we should know about? Like, is that decision something urgently that needs to be decided today, or something that we might have more time to discuss as we think about how much money we want to make sure we move into FY27?
Thank you, Mr. Steininger. We haven't had a lot of communication from assembly grantees on this topic. There has certainly been some. I would say that of all of the assembly grantees, there have been 4 or 5 that have been in direct contact with me who have been experiencing challenges with their budgets. You know, of the assembly grantees, they vary widely in what percentage of their total budget comes from an assembly grant versus other sources. And as you would expect, those grantees who receive a larger portion of their budget from the assembly are struggling more, or would struggle more without full funding. And those with smaller percentages struggle less. If that doesn't fully answer your question, I'm happy to take another stab at it.
If I could interject there about, do we have to make the decision tonight or later? We did communicate to the grantees that we would get back to them in mid-November. And so we need to provide them some feedback.
If we wanted to delay that decision or deliberate on that decision longer, would it be a workable solution to release maybe another tranche of money, like a smaller tranche of money, not the entire amount, but small cost buys us some time in the bigger decision? Or, could we get a better understanding of those grantees where there are problems? And I don't necessarily need you to like list them out here. It could be something that we get in a memo and follow up or something along those lines.
Mr. Seininger, I think you could give us direction to release another less than full tranche, if you will, of funding to the Assembly grantees, either as a whole, so like another 20%, 30%, whatever, another, get further along through the fiscal year, keep them funded through a portion of the fiscal year to buy yourselves more time to make decisions. Or if you would prefer, I think we would also be able to follow direction that it would be more work, but to engage with some of the Assembly grantees who we've already engaged, who've already reached out and summarize their experience in a memo. That would be more challenging, but I think we could do that too.
Mayor Weldon.
Following up on Mr. Steininger's, and I'll put it into a question, because I was just gonna, the one grant recipient that I know that needs to know an answer pretty quickly is the Alaska Committee, because they do get Gavel, Alaska. And they're trying to, and obviously they have to do it way before the legislature gets here. But my question is actually, in the FY26, have we accounted for these grants already?
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. Yes, as we provided the budget summary for you, it anticipates that all of these grants are fully released to the grantees.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Ms. Hall.
I'm wondering with the Assembly grants, if we have kind of a triage system, what is life and safety? I see childcare is always rising to the top as a great need in across the state. So do we have something that if we take this money away, we're kind of going backwards? But some of these other things, it's like, yeah, they'll survive without their funding. They may find another source, or it's not going to really negatively impact health, safety type issues or workforce or affordability.
If I could just take a stab at answering that question, I think that criteria and metrics would be an excellent use of the Assembly's time and to develop, to establish your priorities as part of the FY27 budget process. So, I mean, I think as you look at our FY27 budget, you are going to have to ask yourselves those questions. We would want to involve the Assembly in any type of metric or matrix, and we're happy to do that. But I think just given the highly personal nature for many of these organizations, we could easily spend the next month arguing over metrics for 40% of an Assembly grant instead of really looking at what our FY27 landscape is going to be.
Follow up? Yeah, and I guess I was thinking more FY27, get through this, but going forward be a lot more targeted. Thank you.
Mayor Weldon, maybe you could start us with a motion just on the first one, just to put something on the floor, and we can walk through these,
Okay, so I think
see
the
where people are
first
at
one
right now.
would be to, I move that we absorb the $6.4 million gap this year for FY26. Is that the one you're talking about?
I think maybe it would be easier if you stick to I know there's two places that the action number 1 here, I think you're saying the same thing, but it may be easier to
I'll
just.
turn to that page because the other page didn't have it.
Okay, yeah.
All right.
Page
so
26, action number 1.
that one doesn't have it either. I'm going to the last page, so.
Okay. This does not need to be the way, the staff have a recommendation. Maybe we could put that on the floor.
I'll try again. I move to direct staff to not do any broad service reductions or formal operating budget reductions for FY '26, but fund FY '26 from the unrestricted fund balance. Does that work?
Staff, that's clear motion. Okay. All right. I'll say any objections, but because we're just starting this conversation, even if you don't object, but you'd like to make a comment, you are welcome to. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would be interested in seeing what the proposed service reductions were for 26.
Like the assemblies or the managers or?
Sorry, and maybe that should have been a question. When I read that, I was believing it to be like that staff and, city leadership had come back with service reduction ideas. Am I incorrect in what that second sentence means?
I understand now. I'll ask staff that whether several service reductions ideas were brought forward meant in the community from the assembly or from you all.
Thank you, Chair Wall. So I did put out a call to department heads, and they're very concerned about this topic, and so we've had meetings and multiple communications on it to suggest service reductions that might be natural or an easier fit for their department. A great example is a service that maybe was added in this year's budget that we haven't been able to hire for. Is that something that makes sense to pause? So I don't have a full list of those for you tonight, but I'd be happy to bring that back to you.
All right, I'm hearing an objection. I had other people before you, unless, sure.
Sorry to interrupt. That wasn't part of my motion, just so you know. That particular line, second line, I skipped. I said no broad service reduction or formal operating. I did not touch the second sentence.
Now maybe I'm confused. Staff, are you?
Can we take a
Yes.
recess for a few minutes?
let's take a 10-minute break and we will come back. All right, I am going to bring us back. I see Mr. Smith is still with us. Okay, so I think where we are at is the mayor has made a motion to decide tonight that we are not going to be looking at service reductions in FY26. And Mr. Smith has objected because he would like to see the staff recommendations on service reductions before making that decision. That is my interpretation of where we're at. Mr. Smith, is that a good articulation?
I do think that's fair. Yes, thanks.
Any questions on the motion? Okay. I know we had, I believe we had comments from Mr. Steininger and Ms. Hughes Scandies. Go ahead, Mr. Steininger.
So I guess I like the spirit of the motion in that I don't think we should be looking at stopping doing things we're currently doing now within the course of the fiscal year. Like, I don't think we should be looking at pink slipping employees, shutting down facilities. But maybe in the spirit of what Mr. Smith was suggesting, you know, if there, and what Manager Kester mentioned, if there are things that it's not that we're stopping doing something we're doing now, but we're not going to do something you had planned to do in the next 6 months to save a bit of money, or finding ways to increase the lapse, or those kind of smaller tools that you have as a manager to push down cost. I'd like to see those if there's something you feel like has to come to an assembly decision of, yeah, hey, we weren't able to hire this position, so we're thinking about just stopping trying. I see that a little bit different than service level reductions, I guess, and maybe that's just me trying to think through how I should be interpreting the motion that the mayor made. Because I do think we need expectation of city staff that to make it smoother and easier when we come into our FY27 deliberations, there's not new things that you're starting 3 months from now that we may have to cut in the FY27 budget. And so I guess I just wanted to make that comment on the record to kind of set that expectation, and also kind of get feedback from the mayor to see if that's how I should be understanding the motion.
Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I was going to look at staff because I would be in agreement with Mr. Steininger that I would like to see anything new. If we haven't started design, let's not start a design. If we haven't done a service, but we were looking at it, let's not go ahead with that service. Even to the extent, but this is going to be for another discussion, but like the diversion center, is this the time we say, let's just deal with the compost right now, and that's going to be pushed off for years. But I just don't want to start anything new. But I agree with Mr. Steininger. If there's obvious little cuts here and there, that's fine, but I don't think we do major ones. But if I need to amend my motion to say that, I'd be happy to, but, or do you have enough direction on the motion?
Maybe I just take a crack of my understanding. There is a third question here about any direction on one-time or project funding for FY26. So we could make a decision, don't cut services, but we can also later in this conversation talk about, are there things, projects on the horizon that we want to pause or cut or something? I'll turn it over to the manager to see if I'm characterizing the direction that you want accurately.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to summarize Assemblymember Steininger's comments. I think giving the manager's office direction to, be judicious, not start new things, is something that we can do. And you might get some complaints, right? Because we might have some Parks and Rec programming, for example, that doesn't happen when people are expecting it to happen. I think that I can do, and I don't know that I would spend assembly time going through all of those things. I also really appreciate separating the operating and the capital questions, because when Mayor Weldon said, if you haven't started design on a project, then don't. That has far greater implications for our ability to do the things that we need to do to run the city. So I think taking those two items separately would help provide me clarity.
Mayor Weldon.
Stay with the intent of the original motion. We'll address the other one.
Mr. Steiner, are you satisfied with those answers? Okay. Mr. Smith, do you have, oh, sorry, Ms. Hughes Candies was on the list and hasn't spoken yet. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that helps me to think about this separately between projects and operating. And I think it will be helpful throughout this entire process to try to, as much as I can, think and speak in those different tools that you outlined in this memo of different ways of conserving cost. I would say that I am more of the mind that to absorb it, which is another way of saying with these broad cuts, feels wrong to me, to where I would want to identify what those operating constraints would be. Whether I agree, I think that's a good way of characterizing it, not like pink slipping people or to that end of if it's a spectrum, I guess. I think it's partially with what it would look like potentially, or I'd be interested in what it would look like if we didn't if we didn't give the direction to say hiring freeze, don't hire anyone else, understanding that there would be service reductions that wouldn't be necessarily cuts to services, but it would affect services. It might affect coverage. It might affect things like parks programming is a good example that I was sort of imagining. I would be, I think, interested in looking at things like that for FY26 before I said, with this unexpected revenue, we're just going to absorb it. And I think the magnitude of the decisions we're going to make and the amount of time that we have to make them, it just feels more, it feels better for me as trying to be a good steward of public funds throughout this process. And at the same time, make sure we're engaging the public in this process. Not that we are doing something panicked and willy-nilly. I apologize for the ramble, but I'm trying to give direction that demonstrates where I'm at personally. I appreciate the sentiment of wanting to make thoughtful decisions and not make panicked cuts. But I think knowing the remaining months that are in FY26, I would want to start identifying some of those things. So that's where I'm at.
Others? I'll speak. I'll speak in support of this motion. I think that I like to be holistic in my decision-making when I can, that we are really for making service cuts to the fundamental things that the city does, that we are engaging the public, we're being thoughtful, we're taking our time to do it, because once you cut something, it is not easy to come back. I appreciate but I also share Ms. Hughes Candy's, and I think Mr. Steininger's, and maybe even Mr. Smith's, I think where they're coming from, which is, you know, we have to start having these conversations soon. And I'm not opposed to, when we get to talking about one-time or project funding, you know, pausing things or even hiring freezes, if that's an option that we think makes sense, to say, hold on, we can't keep spending because we know what's coming. So I don't think it's time to do service reductions in FY '26, knowing that we have significant service reductions planned for FY '27, and I want to be thoughtful. And because we have been so or this assembly, past assemblies have been so conservative about how they've budgeted, and because our investments did well, we actually have the space to do that. We saw what the school board had to do when they had 2 months to make big decisions. That was extremely challenging for the public. So any little rabbit holes we go down about pool hours or, other things, I think it's going to be a big waste of time for what we really need to do. So thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Weldon. I saw the order I saw people's hands, Ms. Hall, Mayor Weldon, and Mr. Smith.
And I would speak in favor of no broad service reduction, so in favor of the motion. And looking forward to FY '27, I think we really need to pull the public in on this and have them help us make these decisions. And that would be another reason I wouldn't want to willy-nilly start cutting things in FY '26. I think this should be a very public engagement process.
I'm going to go to Mr. Brooks first because he hasn't spoken yet on this topic. And then we'll have Mayor Weldon, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, the desire of the community through this past election cycle was pretty much, asking for, a tighter constraint or a more efficiency within the operation. So I think, looking at something, even if it's small and supplemental for the remainder of the year, should be worth considering. And if that is a hiring freeze, maybe it's a hiring freeze for non-emergency departments. And even in accompaniment with that, could even consider a cap on overtime for non-emergency departments for the remainder of the year as well.
Mr. Brooks, will you specify if you are objecting or supporting the motion?
I'm objecting to the motion.
All right, I have Mayor Weldon and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everything that Ms. Hughes Candy said is true, and I think we need to look at everything very carefully. Unfortunately, I think that's true for FY '27 and on. FY '26, we're almost halfway through it, and I think we will be rushed to get to some of those things with that. I think staff will look at cuts in services and all those kind of things as they're doing already now, since they've predicted that the ballot measures would pass. So I'm gonna have a little faith in staff, and I think we really need to drill down to FY '27, but I don't think we're gonna have time to deal with FY '26, and that's why I support the motion.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I definitely hear what folks are saying. I mean, and I'm trying to tease out all the, and that's I guess where I'm curious about what the service reduction ideas were, but because for instance, hiring freezes, I don't know if those are a good idea, because even if it's a non-emergency position, we need people in CDD to permit projects to keep housing projects moving forward, for instance. So it's some of these broad things I wouldn't say I'm totally interested in. I mean, there's just a lot of detail in what that looks like, and there's a lot of different options in that. And I'm hearing, pausing new things or pausing a project or a one-time funding. Anyway, I guess that's where I just don't know if I don't know if I see in the motion the granularity that I'm looking for, and I can understand maybe why that's probably a very long motion and hard to put together right now. But I'm hearing some things from the manager that I agree with, that I'm interested in seeing, and again, maybe some one-time projects. we look at positive, there's just a lot of different possible service reductions, some of which I think we maybe should consider for FY26. So that's why I was kind of thinking, continuing this discussion a bit further, because I understand that we'll be doing a lot of work on that for 27. We should probably be thinking about it now, though. So I guess I think I'm kind of similarly situated with you all. It's just I don't have the granularity to say yes, don't make any of some of these like broad anyway. I don't know if I have the granularity in the motion to feel 100% confident with it. So I'm vacillating if I want to remove my objection, because I think we're kind of maybe on the same page, but I also am interested in what possible service reductions could be done in 26. So I'll maintain my objection as well. I think we'll get to where I'm hoping we're going. It's just I don't know if I see that in or hear that in the motion that was made. So thanks.
If this motion fails, we can certainly try something else. We got a long list here still. I don't think Mr. Kelly has spoken, so I'm going to let him skip the line here, but I got the rest of you on my sheet. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I will speak in opposition to this motion. I think much along the lines of Mr. Smith, who just spoke. It's not that a vote against this would be in favor of broad reductions. I think I want to explore what these could be before we make this decision. So I think not necessarily this is the wrong decision, but I think it's too early to make this decision, and so I will be voting against.
All right. Mr. Steininger, you're up. Just so I keep track of everyone, I have Mr. Steininger, then Miss Hughes Candies, and then Miss Hall.
All right, so I'm going to be specifically, I'm speaking in support of the motion, but that kind of my comments earlier and then still now, I want to make sure that the manager is executing the budget going forward, even if we're not making broad service reductions, that you're executing the FY26 budget in a way that ensures that we have flexibility going into our 27 deliberations, that things that have ongoing impacts, you use the example of Parks and Rec programming, but if that's something that's there's some summer programming coming up or something that's seasonal that doesn't really obligate us into 27, doesn't create a problem, that's still within kind of the budget that you've been given in our operating side, that you have the tools to manage the budget in the way that you see best fit to both get the most laps that we can while still delivering the services that we promised when we passed the budget, and not kind of starting things up that you think we're probably gonna reassess in 27. I know that's kind of a fine line for you to walk down, but I think the mayor may have made this point, but spending a lot of time trying to make reductions in 26, I think will just distract from the really hard conversations we have to make about 27. And we're going to be spending a lot of time on those. And so when we think about this, do these discussions about 26, are they going to help us in our discussions about 27, or are they going to distract us from those discussions? And I'll just add before I close, I have been involved in, I think I counted in my head at least 5 different hiring freezes that I was directly involved in managing and executing. And I don't think a single one of them did anything but create more bureaucracy and more headache for delivery of services with long-term implications on what the organization was able to do. So broadly applied, I'm not in support of broadly applied hiring freezes, but I still expect you as a manager to use your discretion to make sure we're not hiring more than we absolutely need to. That, that you recognize we're in a time of constraint, we're going to come into a much reduced budget, but we're trying not, that this policy decision is to try not to micromanage you on the decisions, the hard decisions you have to make over the next 6 months, while we focus on the long-term policy decisions we have to make for fiscal year 27 and beyond.
Manager Kester, do you want to, this discussion is intended to give you direction. And I think, you know, my interpretation is well, I'll let you respond to that comment. I won't put words in your mouth.
I think I very much appreciate that direction. And what I know, you know, the value of you giving me that direction is that when small things don't move forward like maybe the public intended, they may be part of some of those decisions. I could give you a couple examples if that's useful. Marie Drake, expanding gym use at Marie Drake. We have not been able to hire for that position. Seems like the type of position that we need to just take a pause, and that's it's a small, very small example. Another example, when we lost our environmental sustainability coordinator that does a lot of our waste management and staffs the JCOS committee, we paused on advertising to hire to refill that position because there's uncertainty in how the assembly is going to decide to move forward with waste. Those are not examples that I would consider assembly level decisions, but those are examples of me trying to exercise my best judgment, where you may feel that by constituents saying, hey, I want the support for this committee, or I want, you know, this service, but are examples of the type of prudent budget decisions that I am making and will continue to make and consider to be the spirit of Assemblymember Steininger's direction. Does that help?
Ms. Hughes-Gandy, then Ms. Hall.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Lots of good stuff. I think Mr. Steininger's comments very helpful, as we are trying to dial this in and better articulate direction that is helpful to you, that is more nuanced than a budget that was passed that you already have as something to refer back to. I think, like Mr. Smith, I'm going back and forth between saying, really then what is a harm in supporting this? So I'm just trying to flag for this body as we make decisions, the sorts of things that I am thinking about, because what I primarily don't want is a focus on 26 that eats into our 7 months when we need to be making decisions about 27. I think for myself, I am trying to find those things that are additive, that might be something we locate and identify in 26, that is also going to carry over into 27, is kind of how I was thinking about it. 6.7 million in unexpected revenue is something that I can almost picture with like a meter, and it just drops down as we get to that 7-month period. So in a way it buys us time, and in another way it feels like we're just burning through the money without making decisions. So I guess that's just to let you know how I'm thinking about it and the discomfort then that identifies for me. I think potentially, as I'm picturing, I think all this discussion hopefully is helpful to you. It is not my intention to want to micromanage those things. That's good to hear. I assume you are already doing that, and I assume all department heads are already thinking about that, having seen the news. I'm sure they are thinking about it all the time, what they might be able to identify. I think when I am trying to imagine the structure that we will use for 27, it seems natural to me that 26 might get a little bit mixed up in the froth, and that is why I was trying to kind of preserve that, because it may be that if we say just go forward with 26, making prudent budget decisions, that at the next finance meeting, we want to say, you know, can you identify potential, like a partial hiring freeze? And I don't know that if this body would do that. I don't know some of the future things we might want, bring back a list of all vacant positions currently across the department. What would something that would be useful in regards to hiring look like? I do think it's very important, and that is why it's so important we involve the public, that we are giving direction and not just turning to staff and saying, bring back cuts, because we don't want to make any, and I mean, we're all in a very unpleasant situation together. What's that? Everybody, we're all in it together. So I guess that's the only thing is like, I'm thinking what potentially might we find in the 27 process that we might want to say also, could that be applied before 7 months are over? Because if it could, then we might save some money. Like if I'm just thinking of my own budget, like what might I identify that I could cut in 2 months, like looking at my subscription. So that's how I'm thinking about it. I'm not trying to add work for staff, but it seems like we might find things, and I could be okay just letting this motion go tonight, but I think in that process, we might find things that we do want to apply to 26. So that's kind of what I'm trying to preserve.
Ms. Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, I read this as simply the staff recommends no broad service reductions or formal operating budget reductions implemented in FY26. However, they are saying we have the ability to make, you know, that you as staff have already identified some things that might possibly be cut. So I see we're covering both of those in this. Am I reading that correctly? Yeah, so I think, you know, why wouldn't we support this? I think it's maybe got a little confusing, thinking we needed to delve into all the several service reduction ideas that were brought forward, but no, we can ask our staff to do that. Am I correct? And, you know, we can do both. Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Flick.
Thank you, and partly to Ms. Hall and partly to Ms. Hughes Candies. I think as you all wrestle with what FY27 looks like, you will be giving direction before we're out of FY26. So if you say, hey, in FY27, we're not going to do this thing anymore, or we're going to do less of this thing, and in 26, there's already a natural flow to move there, the manager's going to make that happen. So if, you know, program XYZ is going to move to 50% of what it is today, and we have a staff person leave in April, it wouldn't make sense to fill that position for May and June, knowing that we would just have to cut it in July, right? So I think that as you make decisions about 27, we will naturally lean wherever we are in 26 to be moving to that 27 place. And so I think, Ms. Hughes Candies, your concern about what can we do early, that's not the word you use, but what can we do early in 26 that we've decided for 27, I think that will happen naturally based on the decisions that you make and the timing of those decisions.
I'm feeling like I gotta move this along, or do folks have new things to add before we vote? Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
I wish, thank you, Madam Chair. I wish I were there because again, I feel like we're all kind of hoping to say the same thing. I just, and I wish I were there because I would have tried to maybe work through an amendment. I'm gonna try it. If tell me if the room just groans in pain, and then I can get it, because again, I don't want to just belabor this.
I was hoping someone would make an amendment, so
I'm gonna try one. I'm gonna try one, and there might be language at the end of it that will make one person in particular groan, and I'd be open to ideas on it. Okay, so going off the the mayor's motion, which was my understanding was the first line of the suggested action. Staff recommends that no broad service reductions or formal operating budgets are implemented in FY26. My amendment is to add, though targeted reductions such as new programs or projects. This is where it gets bad. May be evaluated and considered. I was going to say by the manager, but okay, though targeted reductions such as new programs or projects may be implemented. I'm going to just stop there because again, I don't know the process of that, but I think we can figure that part out.
That's a good intent language. I'll ask staff if that would give you direction that you feel like you could work with if the body was to vote in the affirmative.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would appreciate understanding how that direction is different from Assemblymember Steininger's comments on, is it to kind of codify his comments in a motion about how to manage the budget moving forward, or is it different?
I'm getting a head nod from Mr. Smith that yes, he's trying to codify that direction. All right, we have a motion on the floor with an amendment. Any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, that is so moved. It brings us back to the original motion as amended. Any objections? All right, seeing none, that is so moved. Thank you all for working through that. And thanks, Mayor Walden, for starting us off. All right, brings us to action number 2. And this is specifically about the Assembly grant funding to grantees. Mayor Weldon, will you start us off with a motion?
Can I have a 2-minute at ease?
Yes.
To confer with Assemblymember Steininger? Your
Mayor Weldon.
and this might be irritating to some, but we're going to do something a little different. But Mr. Brooks, we do take it to heart what the voters tell us. And so my motion is to direct staff to reach out to each member on the Assembly grant budget list and ask them for an amended request.
The last part of your motion was hard to hear.
And to ask for an amended request.
I see Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will object to that motion. I would object because this would not be the first part of the budget. This would be, I guess, what I would consider classic, what I heard people voicing that they didn't want to do, which is to make willy-nilly cuts. So we've identified one section of our FY26 budget and what's that? Operating budget. Sorry, I'm distracted. Our FY26 operating budget, and we've pulled this piece out, and then we've said, maybe we should cut this. And let's go back to these people and see how they would do without that budget. To me, I don't know why I wouldn't say, Manager Custer, go to this department and see what they could do without. There's a difference, obviously, but I think there are probably 9 different opinions of what we would all rank as potentially the first place we should go for cuts. And it probably comes as no surprise to this assembly that for me, this would definitely not be the first place that I would go for cuts. So I would object for those reasons. And then in our wonderful packet, which I really did like, on page 31, we have service listings broken out into different sections. And that's another way of thinking about different parts of the budget that you could just go into with a wrench and start messing about. But there's nothing about this piece that makes sense to me with the rest of the memo and the rest of the packet, why this decision was pulled out, even from staff. The fact that it's a section that staff is asking for direction on was strange to me. Not strange to me, I can figure out common sense wise, but to me it is an inappropriate piece. It doesn't match with number 1. So to say, this is our recommendation here, but also what about just cutting this piece? So for all of those reasons, I will object.
Madam Mayor, go ahead.
I apologize. Apparently that sounded harsher than I meant it to. That's not what I was looking for at all. But thank you for that, Ms. Hughes-Gannis, for stomping me into the ground. Anyway, the thought behind this, and that's where I can say, if they would, how about I would amend it to say would consider an amended request. My thought was maybe some of these people, knowing our circumstances, might alter their wishes. So I would add that they consider an amended request. But I hear what you're saying, Ms. Hughes-Gannis.
I'm going to not treat that as an amendment and just treat that as your motion. I think that was your intent. So we have a slightly different emotion on the floor now. Ms. Hughes-Gannis, you maintain your objection, yes. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will also object to this motion. I remember this assembly grants year being pretty fraught. We cut a lot of requests in half. We made a lot of recurring requests not recurring. And to that end, I think that much of these requests are not, in fact, recurring. And I just don't think this is, I agree with Ms. Hughes-Gannis, this is the place I would not cut. And for many of these folks, they really can't afford to take the time to make an amended request. And I can't imagine they have budgeted on what they've currently gotten, but they've had to assume with nonprofits with shoestring budgets, they've had to assume that they will get the grants that we did promise them. So I would be, I'm very much objecting to this motion, though I appreciate what the mayor is attempting to do.
Mr. Kelly, then Mr. Brooks.
In the interest of time, since I largely agree with Ms. Atkinson and Ms. Hughes-Gannis, I won't restate their points.
Mr. Brooks.
I would speak in support of the motion. Looking at the list that was given here, yes, to Assemblymember Atkinson's point, there are a lot of these organizations who don't have the ability to close the gap if anyone were to occur. But phrasing the question to some of these entities, like the mayor had mentioned might result in a level of understanding. A handful of these organizations have very significant asset withholdings and reserves. And I think that those would be some of the more considerate organizations to, maybe lighten their ask a bit to help the city as a whole.
Mr. Steininger.
And I'll speak in support of this as well. I think there's some of these organizations, the purpose of my question of asking who's reached out to say that this is causing problems was to also get an understanding of, are there organizations who haven't reached out at all? And that tells me there may be some of these organizations that are willing to come back and say, yeah, we can help. We see what's going on at the city level as well. We can also sharpen our pencils and kind of be part of that process. And I don't see this necessarily in conflict with our action on point one earlier, because we all know that our management within the city are sharpening their pencils and trying to come out of fiscal year 26 with as little spend as possible while still achieving all the goals we have. And by going back to these grantees, I feel like we're asking them to do the same. And some of them may come back and say, nope, we have slotted every penny of this and need it to deliver what we need to deliver to constituents within the community. And those, a lot of these are social services grants that are going to the neediest of Juneauites. And I don't really expect those ones to come back saying, hey, we cut it in half. But some of these are, kind of on the nice to have, but they're good things that we funded for very good reason, but might be able to come back and say, in the spirit of what they know the city's going through, they can come back and show support for the efforts that we're doing. And I think that's, the mayor's motion is asking to see where that support is and where that kind of community belt tightening can happen. So I'm supporting the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm objecting for the purpose of a question, and that's a concern of mine, I guess, is just, I don't want to I don't want to drag this out for months, I guess. So a question for staff, like, how quickly can we ask, and can we set a short timeline so that, we can maybe have a sense of responses by the December meeting? Is that a reasonable time frame? Summer finance meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Test. There we go. I think it is possible to reach out to organizations and request that they get back to us in time for packet preparation for the December finance meeting. I think any faster than that would be challenging for the organizations that might be interested, if any are interested, in taking a hard look at their budgets. That work can be onerous and challenging. So giving them less time, I think, would make it that harder for those that potentially might be able or willing to do that.
Thank you for that. I'll remove my objection and speak in favor of it. I don't know we're going to hear back. I think it's worth an ask. And we may see, we may not, but if we can, again, hopefully deal with this by the end of this fiscal year, I'm okay with that, with asking this, and so I'll support the motion. Thanks.
I'll speak in opposition to this motion. I too feel like this direction is counter to the direction we just gave. This is part of our operating budget. These are groups doing work on our behalf, and this is their operating budgets in most of these cases. I think it plays into this idea that our community grants are philanthropy, that we're doing this to be nice. We're doing this because these are needed services in our communities that others can do more efficiently and better than we can. I also think it's a waste of time to ask these groups, can you ask for less money they can do that if they want to. They can come back and tell us that they're not going to be spending the money. But the nonprofit sector is under attack right now. So I think it will be a waste of our time to try to gather that information and then try to sort through this as a body about what we do or do not want to do with that. So with that, I will call the question. We have a motion and we have an objection.
On the motion to direct staff to reach out to each organization on the Assembly grant list and ask them to consider an amended request. Mayor Weldon,
Yes.
Assemblymember Hughes Standies,
No.
Assemblymember Atkinson,
No.
Assemblymember Smith,
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly,
No.
Assemblymember Hall,
No.
Assemblymember Brooks,
Yes.
Assemblymember Steininger,
Yes.
Chair Wall.
No.
Motion fails, 4 ayes, 5 nays.
Could we get an alternative motion? Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. I would move to direct staff to distribute the remaining Assembly grant funding to grantees in FY '26.
Any objection? Seeing none. Seeing none, that's, go ahead, Ms. Hall.
For the amendment to direct staff to distribute the remaining funds, but ask them, if any of you don't need these funds, please let us know.
Any objections to that amendment?
I think that's what the first motion was. Or with.
This is just very soft language if you go and hand them the money and then
I'll object just because I appreciate what Member Hall is trying to do. I just think I'm trying to think of staff here, and I don't know how that it's good direction to direct them to distribute the funds. I don't know what that process looks like. If it's an email with an ACH, and then you say, by the way, in bold, don't let me know if I can have this money back. It maybe staff could elaborate, but this just seems like a waste of their time. But I do appreciate the sentiment, so I'm going to object.
We have an amendment, we have objection. Ms. Wendell, will you call roll on the amendment?
Thank you, Chair Wall. On the amendment to direct staff to distribute the remaining funds, but ask organizations if they don't need these funds to please let us know. Assemblymember Hall,
yes.
Assemblymember Hughes Standies,
No.
Assemblymember Smith,
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly,
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson,
No.
Mayor Weldon,
Yes.
Assemblymember Brooks,
Yes.
Assemblymember Steininger,
Yes.
Chair Wall.
Oh,
Amendment passes, 6 ayes, 3 nays.
that brings us back to the original motion as amended. Ms. Wendell, any objections? Ms. Wendell, oops, sorry, we don't need, that's moved. We're good. Moving on. Okay. The last question, does the AFC wish to give any direction on one-time or project funding for FY '26? I believe we already gave some direction to not start new things, but maybe I'll ask staff what direction they would like here.
We brought up a couple of examples. There's certainly many capital projects on our, what we call it the one-liner, which you get in the CIP every year, which are capital projects with funds left in them. There are projects in varying degrees of readiness. So if there's any intention to, pause those projects or not start any new projects, I think that I would appreciate a deliberate direction in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Smith. Oh, well, we'll go to Mr. Smith. Sorry. Mr. Smith, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the CIP report or the CIP for this project, I don't know if it's a hybrid of a red herring with a boogeyman, but I will move that we pause any action related to the Waterfront City Museum and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objections? Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I appreciate the sentiment and I actually probably agree with it, but at this time, I don't think I'm ready to do one-time projects without getting more information on all of them. So I'll maintain my objection.
All right. Any other objections or people who want to speak to the motion? Go ahead, Ms. Candies.
I'll speak to the motion just briefly. I'm going to support it. I fully am probably the same mind where Mayor Weldon is coming from. The reason I'm going to support it is because I would be comfortable giving broad guidance to staff over not starting projects that I guess I don't know what, to Mayor Weldon's point, I don't know if anything's going on with the Waterfront Museum. So maybe I'll interrupt myself and ask staff, is anything going on with the Waterfront Museum?
No, it would be career suicide for me to start that project without a discussion with the assembly first.
Perfect. I do not want to assume. I did assume. Okay, so I feel okay saying there's nothing going on with the Waterfront Museum. It would be career suicide for our wonderful manager. So I feel comfortable with that direction, and I will move to give broader direction after this.
So you're not objecting? Okay. Yeah, sorry. All right, we have a motion and we have objection. Any other comments? I'll just so the body knows where I'm at. I'll also support this just because it feels like a no-brainer, but in general, I won't be ready to make any other pausing decisions immediately, but we may have other ones given some broad direction that we want to give tonight. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Brooks.
I wonder if it is the will of the body to consider any more of the unrestricted funds within the CIP for the Capital Civic Center, or when it comes to the estimated costs related to the renovations of the Burns building, maybe directing staff to seek secondhand or state surplus as a temp makeup while we navigate the hard financial times. And
Mr. Brooks, not to interrupt you.
Yeah.
We've got a motion on the floor about the specifically the Waterfront Museum. So if you want to hold comments on other topics till that we've voted on that.
I was just asking if anyone wanted to discuss, I could do an amendment, but we'll let the action just go through then.
Can still make those other motions afterwards, so to keep it simple to the one project. Okay, we have, Madam Mayor, go ahead.
Since no one's speaking up to object, I will withdraw my objection, except for I can tell Mr. Brooks was looking for direction. I can tell you right now, again, I am not ready to cut anything more.
All right, so we have a motion with no objection. And so that is so moved. Ms. Hughes Candies, did you want to make a motion? Was that what you were indicating?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm struggling to think. I would like to,
Take an Andes?
I'll take an Addie's.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence and the at ease. I am much in the same vein that I think it was beneficial for this body and hopefully beneficial for staff with the first item to verbalize some feedback on, like we did on operating. I am just wanted to, I think at this time, I am not going to make a motion because it's my belief that if we ask staff to bring back a specific list, much like this, only for projects, again, we might be going down FY26 rabbit holes when we need to be going, it's our job to be going a little bit higher. I think some people have already verbalized that they're not comfortable making decisions without knowing more about what that particular project is at, which makes sense to me. There's a couple that are popped out in this memo tonight, which I think are those ones that I appreciate that staff has identified as, you know, these are firmly in the project category. These are things that it might be good to get direction on. I think there is not one motion that sufficiently leaves room for that process to happen, keeps us out of rabbit holes, and does what I intend to do after talking with staff. So much in the same vein as trust, we sort of codified some of Mr. Steininger's comments and Mr. Smith's motion earlier. I'm not going to attempt to do that, but it is my hope and belief that the city manager and staff are looking at all of those projects and identifying which of those have not started and are likely to run into financial problems in this new fiscal environment in FY27 and make due diligent decisions there while we start this process and we engage the public. And then I will just briefly say, because Eagle Crest is in our memo, and because I did have the pleasure of being involved in an Eagle Crest meeting today with some staff, that I want to identify that personally to this body, that based on the most recent information that I have, I do think when we get, again, it's one of those things, we may not get all the way to the calendar start of fiscal year 27, and we may get new information that makes us stop a project, and that might occur in FY26, but that will depend on the natural flow of when we receive certain fiscal information. So I just want to highlight that is one, for instance, I have deep concerns about in this new fiscal environment. So trying to articulate it, apologize, thank you for letting me ramble, but I think that much like the operating, I will trust that it is the manager's jobs to know which of those projects we would not want to start or put fiscal resources into. And I'll stop at it.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. So are we ready for another discussion item or another motion or?
Sorry, you want to make a motion or you are making a discussion point?
I think I was going to start with a discussion and see if maybe it's more efficient to go as a motion.
I would say either if you want to make a comment to the body, go ahead and do that, or make a motion as opposed to begin a discussion right now. Is that helpful? And you can I can move on to someone if you're not quite ready for that.
No. I think I'm ready. I'll go ahead and make my motion. I would move that we take up discussion on grants as it pertains to the Affordable Housing Fund, and if we still want to continue to issue grants, that we take up that discussion at a future Finance Committee meeting. And I can speak to my motion if, okay. So in Lands Committee earlier this week, we forwarded on to the Assembly about $2.3 million worth of affordable housing projects. More than half of those are grants to nonprofits. And I see there's definitely a need that's being met by these nonprofits, and there's a reason why it's better for them to receive these as grants. But that also means that's money that's not coming back into the fund to be used for future projects. And considering that a part of the Affordable Housing Fund is funded through sales tax revenue, I think it's important at least to consider maybe a temporary moratorium on grants being distributed from the Affordable Housing Fund for future rounds, not for round 5 that were forwarded to the Assembly this year, but for future rounds if we want to, as a practice, just focus on issuing loans that would eventually come back and fund future projects.
Mr. Kelly, I think we are still on the discussion topic of FY26. And so if you are not making a motion to change the Affordable Housing Fund amount that you've already that has been forwarded to the Assembly, I would hold that for another committee or different spot in the budget process for next year.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With that, I'll withdraw my motion.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would give the same direction to Mr. Kelly if he's talking about this year. It's already moved to the Assembly, so we'll discuss it there. But I don't want to make a formal motion because I think we've had enough on this particular topic, but I would just let staff know that I would be looking for information on any project FY26, FY27 that they think are new, don't think it's got traction, something to that effect, so we could be considering it. That's all I have.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just tagging on to what the mayor was saying there a bit, looking at projects that haven't had progress in long periods of times, like you're saying, not appearing to have momentum or have been stagnated a little bit.
Staff, I feel like we're kind of in consensus on those general comments. You guys feel good with that direction without a motion? Great. Okay. So we have not made it through this memo, which is okay. We knew this would be a while. It is 8:30. And we have an executive session that we do need to get to. So my proposal would be, but I'll look to the body, is that we either spend some time talking about FY27 for about a half hour before executive session, or we tackle an easier topic and just do some question and answer about foregone revenue, which was the next agenda item. And maybe staff will have an opinion on where they want our attention right now, but that would be my question to the body. Are you okay tackling one more, and do you want it to be talking about next year's budget process, or do you want to talk about foregone revenue? Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I would prefer to spend a little time talking about FY27, just so we could start to outline that process, what that will look like.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair, I agree. I mean, there was a question the staff may want questions or want a response on in terms of, public engagement. I have an idea for the foregone revenue that I could bring up, but I mean, just to foreshadow, I wonder, in the past, we've done a group of 3 assembly members who tackle some tricky subjects like foregone revenue or complex subjects where if the whole body was working on it, it could be painful for everyone. And they can work, more nimbly, come up with some recommendations. They work with staff, not in violation, obviously that, and with that number of people, not in violation of Open Meetings Act, and then come back to us, or come back to the body with some, having kind of run it through. So that would be a possible suggestion, but sorry, my thought would be FY27 and maybe that for foregone. Thanks.
Making sure folks have energy for a little bit more discussion on FY27. Go ahead, Mr. Steiner.
Wanted to make sure there wasn't, because I agree with everybody, FY27 and talking about the process, and especially the public process makes most sense right now. But I wanted to make sure that staff, that we're not delaying any potential action on the foregone revenue and stalling that process, because it's been something I've been looking forward to talking about for quite a while. So
As Mr. Steininger, as exciting as foregone revenue and docking fees are, I don't think there's any harm in moving those to a future AFC meeting.
All right, let's do another half hour and then we'll, at max, and then we'll get a break before our executive session. All right. Ms. Flick.
I will assume you all have labored intently over this terribly long memo and just cover some highlights on FY27. You all have already discussed that we have got a long and hard set of discussion and decisions to make upcoming. There's a lot of things that we can do to help with that decision making. One of the big questions is, how big is the hole we need to fill? So on the chart in the middle of page 27, I've highlighted the 3 revenue decreases that we've already talked about. Again, those are annualized numbers. So that is assuming that no cuts are made to 27 no cuts are made to 26. All cuts are made in 27. It'd be $11 million in sales tax and roughly $1 million in property tax. In addition to that revenue loss, we know that we are going to have expenditure increases. The negotiated contract with MEBA has a built-in increase for wages in 27. We know that IAFF and PSA contracts, once they are finally negotiated, will have an increase. We're putting that number at 2.5 million, which is kind of a 25-26 combination number. We also know that there are other things that we need to budget on an ongoing recurring basis due to our new love of glacial flooding outburst things. So we know that we're doing an annual emergency operation, and we need to put funding aside to handle those staff costs and those minimally related costs that we would expect to experience every year. We know that there's ongoing just flood mitigation staff work, whether that's working with the Army Corps or working with residents, other things that are going on. And we know now that we have these HESCO barriers in place, and we will likely have more, there's ongoing maintenance that we're responsible for, and we need to include that in our budget. So rough numbers, not knowing exactly how much we need to budget as it relates to GLOF, we're looking at about $16.2 million of gap. 11.2 million of that is operational. So annually speaking, that's a relatively decent number. We've talked about staff's recommendation of looking at service reductions and potential revenue as kind of the primary things that would be done in a public forum. And on page 31 of the packet is a service listing whose origin started with the 2019 priority-based budgeting exercise that was done That list has been updated to reflect more current groupings and more current services that have been edited. And we've grouped these into 4 groups. And the first one is core services that the city is responsible for doing. We just need to do those. The second are services that are things that we need to do, but perhaps we can control the level of service. So an example is at CBJ, after a snowstorm, we'd like to have our streets cleared in 24 hours. It doesn't have to be 24 hours. It could be 36 hours or 48 hours. So we could pick that, that level of service that we provide while still needing to provide that service. The group that's called number 2, support, those are really all those ancillary things that have to happen in order for your core services or discretionary services to take place. And then the third list are all of those discretionary items. Think of those as the things that make a city the place that people want to be, but not necessarily those required services. And so what we'd like to do is walk away from this discussion with kind of an agreement that we want to focus our service reductions on the discretionary list with some attention to that core set where we can adjust the level of service. So it's not a question of do we do it or not, but are we good taking 2 days to clear streets instead of just 1? And then, you know, with our new and fantastic communications and engagement division, they're already working on some plans to engage the public and some different mechanisms that we could use. And so we'd really like to hear from you your preference or guidance on the structure of how that looks. You know, do we want to do public meetings? Do we want to use online surveys? We have some online tools that are available. And how quickly do we want that public engagement to take place? And so with your guidance, it would be useful to hear kind of what you would like to see within that. And that I think that, you know, as far as what we need from you tonight, that's probably the most time sensitive. As we said in the beginning, there's lots of other information and decisions to be made. Those don't have to be made tonight. But in order to get our communications group really working on a useful set of strategies to bring back to you for your feedback, it would be good to know kind of the structure and timing of that public engagement. And also if we have consensus on focusing on that discretionary list and that kind of 1.5 core list.
Going for questions, I said Mr. Kelly, Ms. Candies, and Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. I see some pluses and minuses with going with the public survey route, but in particular minus might be if it's not a scientifically conducted survey, if it's just we ask people their opinions, if we happen to get a few responses, and it may or may not be representative of what the population actually wants. So my question is, like, if we did decide to go the survey route to get this public input, would we be set up to conduct a real representative survey?
Not without an appropriation from the assembly. Right now, for example, we do the survey annually of our community for tourism purposes. So we ask them, you know, level of tourism, all those questions. And that runs us about $40,000 to have a statistically significant survey. So something like that, you know, we'd have to contract out with. We're talking Survey Monkey territory here.
Thank you.
Ms. Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to verify 1.5, you say these are mandated functions of the city, however, the level of service may have some discretion. And I feel like that is true of 1, core services as well. Would you agree?
she's like, damn it. You certainly could say, no, I disagree with the grouping. And I just want to emphasize that this did not come out of Director Flick's head. We used it we took these based on the tabs from priority-based budgeting. I wasn't here for that exercise, but they had labeled things that were, discretionary, essential, et cetera. So for example, if you want to talk about minimum staffing at JPD, if you want to talk about not patrolling during the night, if you want to talk about changing our service levels for CCFR and who we respond to, how quick our response times are to emergencies. All of those things are things that you can talk about. We are trying to present you with our best proposal of something that will be a good use of your time, because I have been through these budget exercises before, and what happens is those core services just are not something that the public and eventually the governing body is willing to move on. If you need to go, and that could be different for this community, and you may need to go broaden this conversation. It is just our attempt at trying to hone down on something that's manageable, a manageable sized conversation to the public. So that's absolutely the type of feedback that we're looking for. Nope, I want to start at zero. And I believe the priority-based budgeting exercise also started with all the services, and the feedback that I heard, and I don't know if you were here, Deputy Manager Barr, was that a lot of time was spent saying, yeah, these are essential services and we're going to do them. And that's time that, you're not talking about other nuances and other things. So that is why we presented it to you in this way. It does not need to be how you approach it, but that's kind of our justification.
I appreciate that justification. And I did have the pleasure of being here with the card exercise when we did this before.
Mayor Weldon.
So hearing that lovely price tag for the survey, I would say we do a combination of, I don't know if we still can doing something online with the budget tool that we did in the past with Mr. Rogers. And I think we should have some open forum things. I don't know if we want to get out the cards, but it was interesting because when I had the cards, I gave them to, 10 of my friends just to see what they said. And it was very interesting to see that nobody was the same. So, but it would be interesting to see what the public, we need to involve the public, because I don't.
Mayor Weldon, do you have a question?
Yes. I thought we were giving direction to them. Sorry.
I think we were asking questions still. I didn't. That's
Okay,
where
so
we.
I will bring it to a
Anyways.
question. Let me think about this for a second. What other tools can we use to get it out to the public besides open forum and budget tools?
Madam Mayor, there's, obviously we can do in-person town halls, we can do a Survey Monkey, we can do the statistically significant survey. Within the budget tool that we currently have, there's an online platform where residents can log in and actually provide feedback. So I think, I don't want to say the sky's the limit, because certainly that's not true. But I think there's a lot of creativity that can go in our in our tools that we would regularly have, and certainly our communications team is incredibly creative and can help guide that and bring back some good ideas for you.
Ms. Hall, did you have a question, or are you going to hold for comment time? Okay. Mr. Steininger, did you have a question?
I had a comment, but I figured out a way to turn it into a question. Ms. Hughes Candies was asking about number 1 core versus 1.5, and I've been kind of struggling with how we go about having this conversation with the public and not wanting to, waste time asking them questions about things that we know we're not going to cut or can't cut. You can't eliminate the assessor's office, that as much as maybe some constituents might want us to. You know, some of these are not reasonable, but I think eliminating some because we've decided, oh, this is uncuttable, may not be as, we may get a lot of negative pushback on that. You know, looking at some of these where, you know, things that I've definitely gotten emails complaining about spending too much money on fall into number one core in some ways. And so I guess my question is, if we include number one core in that communication and that information gathering from the public, whether it's through an online survey or what have you, how do we plan to kind of inform the public on the implications of the input they give us? Like, if somebody gives us the input of, cut permitting staff in half, are we gonna, like, is there gonna be a widget that says, you know, this would roughly impact permit issuance time by triple or what have you? Like, are we gonna give enough information to the public to truly understand the recommendations they're giving us, I guess, and how are we gonna do that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't have an answer to that question because it gets so unwieldy so quickly because we do so much, which is why I was trying to get you to narrow my list down of items that we needed to ask the public about. So, you know, I think if the direction is to start, you know, with everything, then we would need to bring you back design a process that does that, and that's going to just take some thoughtfulness.
Any other questions? Okay. We have two questions here. It's, you know, feedback on public engagement, and do we start with kind of core, or do we, you know, do we focus our discussion beyond core, I guess? So, and I know they're linked, but I feel like one drives the other probably. So maybe starting with the question of, do we, I'll read. Staff recommends that we focus public engagement and input on services that are discretionary or core, where the level of service can be adjusted. Does the AFC concur with that focus? Mayor Weldon.
Just a discussion, or do you want a motion?
Take a motion.
Okay, I'll make
That worked so well last time. I'm going to try again. Go ahead, Mayor Weldon.
I will say that we direct staff to focus public engagement and input on services that are discretionary or core, where the level of service can be adjusted. And may I speak to my motion?
Go ahead.
I think what Manager Kester said is appropriate. Where we really need feedback is on our discretionary items and on our core services that can be adjusted. That does not mean that an assembly member is hearing quite a bit about something else that they can't bring it up to another time, but I think the public engagement should really be focused on those two items, discretionary and core, where the service can be adjusted.
We've got a motion on the table. Objections? Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will speak briefly to my motion. I agree that there is a difference between what the public gives feedback on and what this body might do. This body might have a more educated opinion of what we think we can do to the core services versus it does get very complicated very quickly if you open the entire thing up to the public. I would prefer, however, to get the public's opinion on the whole shebang, because the magnitude of budget cuts that we are anticipating, if we limit it to 1.5 and 3, to me, I do think that a lot of Juneau's public might have opinions about how do you reduce things in 1, how do you potentially reduce things in 2. so that they can keep some of 3 or 1.5. And if that's the case, then I want to hear that. I will blend that in to say that it would be, well, maybe I should keep it just to 1 and not talk about outreach strategy. I'll just keep it to that. I certainly will be looking at the whole thing, but I think there are good reasons to, Juneau has historically taxed itself and paid for a lot of discretionary things that the rest of the state, it's a limited number of the municipalities that provide this level of service. And I think that when people understand the magnitude of the decisions made in the last election, there is going to be a little bit of whiplash, and then they're going to have opinions about how they keep some of those things. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. And because of that, then I would want their feedback on the whole thing. So that's why I will object.
Mr. Steininger.
And I'll object to, and I think Ms. Hughes Candy's put it very well. The one thing I'll add is I feel like pre-editing the list of options that we give to the public kind of sends a message that maybe we're not willing to listen to all ideas. And I think having all the items on the list helps communicate that we are kind of listening to every idea, no matter whether it's challenging something that we believe can't be cut or reduced. Even if I am very skeptical that we can squeeze much out of the items in number 1 core, I think I think it would be sending the wrong message to not include those in our public outreach as we're asking people what pieces of government that they prioritize the lowest.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I am much along the same lines as Ms. Hughes Candies and Mr. Steininger. I hold firmly as a principle that leadership isn't one party or the other giving direction. It's a discussion. And so I think we should put it on the table, and we should be able to communicate what the effects would be and what the consequences would be. I think that gives us an opportunity for communication. And so I think Ms. Hughes Candies hasn't quite moved an amendment, but maybe I would, since Mr. Steininger and Ms. Hughes Candies have spoken to it, I would move to amend the motion to also include discussion of core essential items.
You've heard the amendment. Any objections to the amendment?
I'll object. I don't need to speak to it.
I saw Mr. Brooks first. Do you want to speak to your objection?
Just objection for the purpose of a question. Assemblymember Kelly, did you include all 4 options for review in your amendment, or was it just 3 of them?
It was my intent to include everything that hasn't been included yet.
Thank you.
Do you remove your objection?
Remove my objection. I just remembered.
Ms. Hall. I will speak in favor of this amendment. I think it's a toss-up, and I understand where staff are coming from. And I think we will need to get granular on, probably these discretionary items at some point with the public. This will be an iterative process, but I do think from having the community have to grapple with those big picture things first will ultimately serve us in the end, even though when we get into the weeds, we'll have to get feedback on the things in that right column, because those are most likely the things that we are going to have to touch. All right, we have go ahead, Mayor Weldon.
Can count votes. I'll just remove my objection.
All right, we have a motion and we have an amendment. Any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, that's so moved. That brings us back to the original motion as amended. Any objections? Seeing none, that's so moved. And I know we're trying to create binary paths when there's obviously gray area between the two. I know that we will figure this out to do a little bit of all these things. The next question is really just getting feedback from the body on the public process. Is that correct, staff? Is that the additional feedback you'd like, or is there some specific things you'd want from us?
Yeah, I think just high-level feedback on the public process would be useful. Timing, I think, is what I struggle with because, you in 6 weeks are going to be giving me budget direction for building the FY27 budget. It would be great to have had all like surveys and public meetings and listening sessions in advance of that. I don't know how to do that. So kind of weighing in on what that looks like, and what's most important to you, right? Like if it's super important, I'll be like, okay, we'll deprioritize other things. So I just think some like high level feedback on process, but also on timing would be useful.
I saw Ms. Hughes Candies, Mr. Steininger, Mr. Brooks.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think my feedback would be, I see that before the retreat, after the retreat, the timing before that. I would say that I have no expectation that there's going to be a super robust public process before the retreat, and I think we will give you that direction as a body, and then I think the earlier we start the public process, the better, because it is going to be an iterative process, and we are going to have to go from 100,000 feet, 50,000 feet, I don't remember the numbers, but we're going to have to zoom in at some point. But that I anticipate, if we take into account the holidays and travel and things, that the real heart of that process is going to take place next year. I remember when the state went broke and they had to balance the budget tool on the website. I don't know that we could have anything as sophisticated as that, but I would really love it if we had something that people could play with themselves at home. Even if it's, putting a link to an Excel sheet or something, and pointing them to it at social media so they could see the challenges of balancing the budget and the cuts that will need to be made. And then I think we should do non-statistical stuff in addition to, if this body wanted to do anything non-statistical, but public meetings, I would think would be part of that. So, I will trust to the engagement team to bring us back strategies through you, but I would just say I would love giving something that allows the public to play with the budget, because I think sometimes that's how you make someone realize how deep the cuts are.
Mr. Steininger.
Ms. Hughes Candies was thorough and covered everything.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering if, maybe we could take a page out of the election process and maybe utilize drop boxes in some sort of fashion, for community outreach. People are more likely to do it if it has more options of partaking and more convenient options. So, the strategic areas like supermarkets and things like that, it doesn't have to be the beautiful drop boxes that we have for the ballots and stuff, but something, sufficient enough with blank pages, and then maybe having just a little bulletin above it or some sort of display that explains, the objective of the community and finances, and then have people just write on a piece of paper. And I know that's all staff and time permitting, but I'd read them all.
Ms. Hall.
I think we have a professional communication engagement division, and I think we should divert a lot of these decisions about the how-tos to the professionals. I think the sooner the better, although running up to the holidays, that's super challenging. I think some community engagement in meetings, maybe downtown in the valley, but ultimately have people fill it out online, so we're not getting multiple, people going to a meeting and providing their input and then going home and doing it again, like you can provide input once and, but again, leave all those little details up to the professionals.
Any other comments? I see a lot of head nods. I'll just add I think there will be, a question of kind of appropriation and spending money, and I'll be, curious what you all come to us with. But I will say that, because we're embarking on this to cut the budget, that, I don't, statistical surveys are probably not where my brain is, but I will always advocate for hiring a neutral facilitator if that makes sense. I know the brand engagement team the community marketing team might have good ideas that don't include that, but that is an expense that I'd be open to, so that we make sure that there's time and attention on putting together that process and bringing us back, an output. Great, I think that is it. Staff, do you have the feedback that you need? Great. Well, we are going to skip the next few items here and we will come back to them. Revenue, definitely something we'll want to talk. Mr. Smith.
Sorry. I'm also, I know a number of us are interested in foregone revenue. I did just want to maybe get a temperature check from the assembly, and I could do it in the form of a motion if that would be okay. Just on the idea of, again, a group of three to kind of maybe dig in a little bit on the foregone revenue, just so we don't lose steam on it. Would you be open to that, Madam Chair?
I think, I don't know that we need a motion because there's nothing keeping three people from doing that regardless. So I see some head nods, and that sounds like a good idea. I'd also say for folks who may not end up in that group, it would probably be helpful if you look through that list and there are particular things that you think are either, that are big movers or easy wins, that you pick those out and can communicate those with staff or be thinking about those, so we all can have a little homework. Does that satisfy you, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I was going to add that I didn't want to be on that group. That was the only part of my motion I was going to add in, but but hold on, I thought I saw the mayor. She probably has better guidance than I do.
Okay, Matt, sorry.
Well, Mr. Steininger already said that he's been interested in this. I've been interested in this, and I've talked to you before, so that will be our core three. And if anybody else wants another group, they're certainly welcome to. Because I have
Who's in the group? I missed Mr. Steininger.
I volunteered you,
Me?
Mr. Steininger. So
We'll see.
and we have
who
lots of
agrees
questions
to
for the
three.
attorney.
I didn't know I was in it. All right, cool. Chair. Go ahead, Ms. Hall.
Clarifying question. So those three, if any of the rest of us have input, we should give it to the staff, who then give it to the.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
All right. That brings us to next meeting date, which is December 3rd, 2025, and executive session. Madam Mayor, give a motion.
I move that we recess into executive session to discuss and update collective bargaining negotiations, the immediate knowledge of which would adversely affect the finances of the municipality. And ask for unanimous consent. I should read the whole thing.
Are there any members of the public that object? Oh, I have to declare a conflict. I have a conflict associated with negotiations with IAFF, and so I will leave for that part of the discussion. Any objections from the assembly about recessing into executive session? Oh, go ahead, Ms. Fleck.
Thank you, Chair. Well, before you actually recess into executive session, do we need to come back to the public or for public action?
We will not need to take motion after the executive session, so when we are done, we will adjourn.
Perfect.